Welcome everyone, Christine here with my latest race tier list for Total War Warhammer 3, Immortal Empires. This one is the final list based on the community polls that I ran, the straw polls, to get your perspective on various races. There's a lot of things to talk about with respect to methodology, but I'll leave that for the end of this video, because right now I just want to get into these results. But suffice to say, to the question, do I believe these results are legitimate? Yes. Do I agree with them? No. There's some things I agree with, some things I disagree with. I would say I agree more than I disagree, but on some things I disagree with, I would disagree very strongly. And on some things I agree, of course, I do agree very strongly. So anyway, with that in mind, let's start with the Empire. The Empire is an S tier race. They got over 8% of the vote when we average it down between the 10 best and 10 worst races poll. They are surprisingly one of the most popular races in the game. The question was the best races, and unsurprisingly the Empire, who has some of the most played campaigns in the game, especially for people that do own Warhammer 1 as well, because remember, there's people that only own Warhammer 3 or Warhammer 2 or whatever. The Empire does come out on top. It's not the best race in S tier, it didn't get the best results, but it's the second best race at well over 8% of the vote. Why do I think the Empire got that? Well, one, Karl Franz and Empire are the iconic race for Warhammer, so I'm sure that played a major role, but I think the Empire, after Throne's Decay, is in a really good spot. They get a lot of heroes pretty quickly. They have research that gives them one hero capacity. They can get more heroes pretty quickly, even if their hero capacity does increase at tier 3 with buildings. And crucially, with Throne's Decay, they have very unique campaigns with Elspeth, Gelt, and Karl Franz. Those three play so very, very differently in their campaigns. And even races with more legendary lords can't match that kind of uniqueness. Even races in S tier don't necessarily match that uniqueness in the same way that the Empire does. So I think that's one of the reasons the Empire got so far. They have a versatile playstyle. Their infantry line is not necessarily the best in a lot of ways, though there's some regiments renowned and there's Electrocount state troopers that can help with that. But cavalry, artillery, access to all of these after Throne's Decay compared to before Throne's Decay means that you can play an Imperial campaign in a lot of ways. You can go cav, you can get handgunners, you can go artillery, you can even go huntsmen and archers and all that, though that's probably the weakest playstyle. Well, melee infantry would be the weakest playstyle. Maybe that's one thing CA should focus on going forward. Some people will disagree with that and say not every race needs to have a solution to all problems, to which I reply, Cafe does. And I'm sure Cafe is actually going to get better, because Cafe has powerful range units, not necessarily powerful cavalry, though they do have it, and they have flying artillery. So yeah, Cafe, I used to say that the Cafe is the Empire, but better. Now the Empire has certainly gone farther ahead. So I agree with this decision, though because of the infantry situation, I could rank them in A tier. That would be my personal perspective, but I understand perfectly well why the Empire is in S tier. Then the race that got the most votes out of all of them, it's the dwarves. What do you want me to say? They're awesome. And the reason they're awesome is not because they have the best unit roster. They don't. They lack cavalry, which is actually pretty important for field battles to chase down units. So they have gyrocopters to do that, but obviously gyrocopters are nowhere near as good. But from my perspective, it's not the uniqueness of the campaigns, though certainly Malachi plays a lot different than others. It's because they're strong, and it's not necessarily just because they're a strong race, though they certainly are, but it's one thing from my point of view why the dwarves do deserve it. Whether or not they won because of that, I can't speak for anyone on this except myself. But the way I see it, what really makes the dwarves work is, even though the campaigns may not necessarily have the best variety, the dwarves as a race inherently have a lot of variety because of the grudge system, the legendary grudges, the regular grudges, the Age of Reckoning, so on and so forth. And so you end up with a very interesting campaign experience that does vary. You also have many builds with the dwarves that do work. The basic one is Quarreler Grudge Thrower. That's the one that worked pre-patch, but now you have Thunders, you have Iron Drakes, you have Gyrocopters, Gyrobombers, Artillery, so many things. Hero capacity is much better. Different types of units. You can go Slayers, you can go pure melee infantry, you can go range, different types. There's so many options. You do like the cavalry, which is an issue. You can use allied recruitment to help you with that. But overall, yeah, the dwarves are in an amazing spot. Greenskins. Well, this one is going to be a bit of an interesting one to talk about. So, greenskins, you can argue are in B tier based on results. But I am going to do something. I'm going to average it out. Because greenskins aren't just 5%. They're 5.7% in the results. So here's how I'm going to do it. If a race is closer to one tier than another, I'll move them to the tier that they're closest to, either up or down. So greenskins getting 5.7% means that they're closer to A tier than they're closer to B tier, because B tier is 5%. Now, by the way, discussing these tiers, 8%, 6%, those numbers are coming from like the results we got. Like Empire and Dwarves got like over 8%, other races got 6% or higher, or even closer to 7%. Some races got minus 5%, some races got minus 8% of the vote. So that's what it's based on. Greenskins, when you average it out, you get like, yeah, I would say they're an A tier. Or A minus if you want to be more specific. Now, why do I think the greenskins are great? If I need to explain that, I'm not sure what to tell you. Just play Grimgor's campaign, you'll understand why. Amazing growth, amazing economy, amazing campaign power, great hero variety. Not necessarily the most army variety, so I think like adding more units it would certainly help them out. The reason I wouldn't believe they're an S tier race is, yes, Grimgor is awesome. To a lesser extent, Grom is, and that's, by the way, also according to your votes. Personally, I wouldn't have put Grom as high as that, but that's a different discussion. But with respect to the greenskins, the issue is people have problems with Skarsnik's campaign, they have issues with Warzak's campaign, and they have issues with Azak's campaign. Those campaigns, by the way, did very poorly in the polling. Like, basically, the greenskin polling is Grimgor has double the votes of Grom, and Grom has triple the votes of anyone else. So let's just stick with that set of data. Now, moving on to the vampire counts. Vampire counts are in D tier. Personally, I would rate them higher. It's kind of a similar situation in some ways. Like, a lot of people do want vampire counts DLC because vampire counts only got one DLC. Yes, they did get the Blood Kiss mechanic with the Vampire Coast DLC, but basically Vampire Coast, although they work, although they're a powerful race, although you won't feel the campaign is miserable, they could use more content and they could use more interesting campaigns. Because basically right now in a Vampire Counts campaign, Vlad and Isabella are just so far ahead of everyone else in terms of fun factor. And that apparently is actually a running theme. Races that have campaigns, multiple campaigns that are interesting are the races that do better. Races that have fewer campaigns in general, or even a lot of campaigns but less interesting campaigns, do more poorly here. I think that's one of the things that's deciding. Because if I look at the placement of all the races on this tier list compared to all the polling data that I got for individual legendary lords for each of these, which I ran on my YouTube channel, it does end up matching very clearly, very closely, the kind of results. Like, so basically, like with Vlad, Isabella, Gorst, and Kemmler, Vlad like got the vast majority of votes. So people don't really care about Isabella's campaign. I mean, it's the same campaign, right? Just different lord effects. I'd say she's actually better to play than Vlad, better, more strength. But yeah, it's basically Vlad. People hate Manfred for good bloody reason. People don't much care for Gorst. He's boring as dirt. And honestly, I think people really are sleeping on Kemmler. Like, I think Kemmler is actually a much more interesting campaign. But then again, you know, an Empire campaign that starts in Bretonia or near Bretonia versus Vlad, yeah, I can understand the situation there. Although you can get the Red Duke the fastest out of all the factions. So there's certainly some benefits with respect to that. Another D tier race, and this actually is slightly in the minus 0.25%, so they're closer to 0% than 2% for obvious reasons, but it is the Beastmen. Matching that theme, that races that have the most varied and interesting campaigns do better and the races that don't do worse, this is exactly the case for a Beastman. Basically, if Tarax wasn't around, Beastman would be Daniel tier, I believe, or at least F-. because people don't really care about the Beastman campaigns except Tarox. So yeah, Tarox is basically carrying the entire freaking race on his shoulder. He got over 80% of the vote. That was one of the most landslide victories of any legendary lord. Like, mind you, Tamarkand did very well for Nurgle and all that, but still, damn, that is something. You gotta admit. But that's the problem. The Beastman experience is basically you play either Tarox or the others are just not worth playing. The race pack is not worth buying. That's kind of like Twisted and Twilight kind of like just made it so. I think that's something CA could worry about, but honestly, like, of all the races that need a rework, it's like Beastman got the rework. It's not horrible. It's just like they could use an update to make them work better in the meta. Like, I think they just haven't aged well in the meta of Warhammer 3 versus Warhammer 2. They were awesome when they came out in Warhammer 2. Really awesome. But now, yeah, they just haven't aged well. And this is not just the case with the Beastmen. So, that like, the issue is lack of variety early on in the campaign. Only one resource dread, and instead of spending that dread on unit capacity, limited unit recruitment until you've done X number of things. It ends up being annoying, right? It's an annoying system. The whole Ruination ritual, yeah, it could use an update. It worked better in Warhammer 2, but the reason it worked better in Warhammer 2 was the way Warhammer 2 played in terms of its campaigns versus Warhammer 3. Okay, Bretonia. This one I admit was a bit surprising in some ways for me. Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised because a lot of people do dislike where Bretonia is. A lot of people do want to rework for it. Out of the Order Tide races, this is the second highest priority for people. That's saying a lot. F-. I admit the vows are annoying. The lack of fucking infantry is annoying. Sure, like, your entire infantry roster is garbage that you can throw in the trash. Like, you can generally play an entire Bretonian campaign. The problem is cavalry is all well and great, but you got a lot of sieges. You can make it better with auto-resolve mods because you then don't have to fight those fucking sieges and have a much better experience. But yeah, people do care about this kind of stuff. And the vows are annoying as well. People do like Lewin. They like Rapods, but yeah, it's also that case. The lack of variety in campaigns, the annoyances of research tree, the annoyances of vows. This is the kind of stuff that people have mentioned for a long time, long before I did these polls. So yeah, Bretonia is not in a great spot. In C tier, we have Wood Elves. I mean, I would personally rate them Daniel tier, but for a different reason than most, I imagine. They're just so damn boring to play, and I think to some extent people agree with that. I mean, they have a really powerful army, so that's one benefit they have. They do have uniqueness in their legendary lords, like Orion, Durfoot, Draika, and Sisters do play markedly differently. Although Orion is boring as dirt, I'll admit that. Like, out of a race that I feel is boring as dirt, Orion is the worst. Though he actually did surprisingly well in his polling. I guess people do like those three freaking armies. Draika actually did the worst, though she's pretty awesome to play in a lot of ways. Though, yeah, I guess starting without the Oak of Ages does affect that. But suffice to say, Wood Elves are good as a race. They're a strong race. I don't think anyone can argue that. Like, that's the thing about C&D. They're all strong races, one way or another. Certainly, Wood Elves is the strongest, though. The stuff I've done in a Vlad campaign, pretty freaking crazy. But strength alone does not determine which races are good and not, because, like, it's replayability, it's how much fun people are having, it's the variety and all that, and that's the problem. Durfoot and Orion play, yeah, they have different effects and all that, but they're starting in the same damn area, kind of have, like, they deal with different things, but they kind of also deal with the same thing, and it's like the fact, and look, it's not the starting location I would fix it, it's the fact every Wood Elf campaign is ultimately about the fucking Oak of Ages. So it's like, it's the same thing in every single one of them. Do you know what you do in a Wood Elf campaign? Regardless of where you start, you kind of want to go to Cafe as quickly as possible, get that freaking forest there because it's a powerful landmark. Do the ritual there because, again, really powerful landmark. And then do whichever you want. But none of them are going to be anywhere near as meaningful as the landmark over there in Cafe because it's Treekin benefits. And so you end up with less campaign variety. Even though the lords are varied, it's just like the Wood Elves, the way they work, they kind of create this situation where even though there's uniqueness with their legendary lords, from my perspective, it ends up being the same thing. Like, I've played a lot of Wood Elves, I gotta tell you. Like, I loved Sisters when they came out. I didn't buy the Wood Elf race pack until I started covering Warhammer Free on this channel. Because why would I? I had Sisters, and before Sisters came out, they were not worth playing. But yeah. Well, Sisters did win, by the way. Some people do like the Forge of... some people apparently do like the Forge of Dave, even though a lot of people do hate it. But still, there you go with Wood Elves. Warriors of Chaos. This one is going to be, I admit, a bit surprising, but they're in A tier. They're actually above. They're obviously above Greenskins because they got over 6% of the vote. Greenskins didn't. Warriors of Chaos do certainly have a lot of campaigns, so that is something that's going in their favor, though. How fun those individual campaigns are, that's a different thing. But look, Be'lakor, Archaon, they're awesome campaigns. Valkia, pretty good campaign. It is a bit easy, too easy, but like they certainly have a unique system. They have really awesome unit rosters, and they do have very different playstyles in those campaigns. Like, I would certainly say Be'lakor, Archaon. Well, Archaon actually less so. I think Archaon's boring as fuck. But at least you're uniting Chaos. But Valkia, Be'lakor, Festus to some degree, yeah, those are awesome campaigns, really worth playing, even if the replayability is not necessarily there. Like, once you've played a couple of Warriors of Chaos campaign and realize that even on vanilla settings, Legendary you're resolving 95% of the battles past the turn 5, yeah, it kind of loses its charm, I'm not going to lie. But beyond that, like, Warriors of Chaos are the kind of race that I would classify as great, but dull. People disagree with that, right? I mean, the question was the best races, and I don't think anyone can deny that Warriors of Chaos are a really good race in a lot of ways. They have some issues fitting in, I suppose. Norska, next up, Norska. Yeah, one of the worst races in the game. Like, by the way, for the longest time in the poll, it did change a bit by like 0.3, 0.2 percentage points. But for the longest time, Norska was the worst race in the polls I did. Not by a lot compared to the other two that are in Daniel tier. We know who's in there, obviously. But certainly a really bad race. They need an update. They need more units. They need more lord choices. Their lords don't have a melee skill line. That's nuts. Like, that alone is nuts. Their systems are horrible. Oh, let me go to a settlement. I'll sack it. Then I may want to raid it for a quest. Oh, those quests, those monster hunts force you to go all over the world, which would be fun if you had the teleportation mechanic with Wolfric, but you don't. Yeah, the entire monster hunts is a weak system. They're basically, I think the best way to describe the Norskins, they're a Warhammer race that has never really been updated since then. They were developed for Warhammer 1, and they're outdated as hell because of that. That would be the case. High Elves. This is going to be a bit surprising to some people, but High Elves only got it to B tier. Why do I think that is? Well, people do like Alfarian, Emmerich, and Tyrion. They think less highly of Alif and Alariel, for instance, and they certainly dislike Teclis. But I don't think it's a campaign variety. I think it's really, in this case, it's actually the race. High Elves are great early on for like 10 turns, but then you get tired of just spamming Spearmen and Archers, or just Archers if you want to go there. And you end up in a situation where getting heroes, recruiting heroes in the first place is time-consuming. You're steamrolling over everything else. You don't have a challenge. It gets dull really quickly. Their systems, their influence system is just meaningless. They actually had their trade vision removed because Jan Bo apparently needed to be made special. And then other issues as well. But yeah, basically, High Elves, I feel, need an update. Not necessarily a rework, but just make things more available. Heroes, units, give us a reason to recruit different units, all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's not like the units are bad. They're not. It's more so the fact that why would I ever recruitment? I might recruit Silveringard, sure, if I cared for it, but it's like the economic question in a campaign. It's the meta of Warhammer 3 versus Warhammer 2. Mind you, High Elves are really powerful at painting the map, but they're also pretty damn boring to do so. The other race, the next one is Skaven. S tier. Sorry, not S tier, A tier. Those Skaven are closer to S tier than Warriors, Gas, and certainly Greenskins, but they aren't over 7%. So they aren't over 7%, they're obviously closer to A tier. Now, Skaven are a great race, undeniably so. They work well within the meta, though they have some weaknesses, like clan rats, Skaven slaves are not worth recruiting. Like, the entire barracks chain is worthless. Like, who the hell wants to recruit Storm Vermin? So that's a bit of an issue. They do suffer from provinces. Like, I think the problem with their economy is that although they have a great economy, the issue with that economy is it's reliant on you getting many settlements in a province. Like, look, they have some really fun units. They have some really powerful Legendary Lords. They have some really fun Legendary Lords. Like, Ica Claw may have a shit start position, but he does have a lot of power and a lot of fun factor in his campaign. He just needs better terrain around Skaven Blight, which Old World mod does solve. And believe me, that campaign in Old World is a lot more fun than Immortal Empires, because you're not clenching your teeth every time you start the freaking thing. But, like, you can't complain about Skaven. They just have, I think, the reason people don't vote them in STR, I think that there's certainly some things, some annoyances that do hold them back a bit. And honestly, the rights and their cooldowns are just not in a great spot. Moving on with the Lizardmen, they are an F tier. And in point of fact, based on the principle of putting races in tiers that they're closest to, so minus 5%, for instance, Lizardmen are extremely close to that. How close are they to FTR minors? 0.08%. That small. So if the results had been slightly more negative for the Lizardmen, they would be an F tier minus. Now, the problems with the Lizardmen are pretty clear. A lot of the campaigns are boring. A lot of the Legendary Lords are not that interesting. Yes, you have Gorok, you have Oxyatl, but those are the exceptions. Like, basically, a lot of the Lizardmen Legendary Lords, regardless of how some people feel about Tenuin or Tic-Tac-Toe and all that, just don't feel that great. And that's just the Legendary Lords. Then there's racial issues, research tree, construction times, hero recruitment, hero capacity, limited economy, the entire jungle situation. I can go on. I've already done so in many videos, but yeah. And even Oxyatl, who has a great campaign, amazing campaign mechanics, his campaign lags. It's not the deal breaker if you're willing to deal with crappier performance, but it is certainly a problem. The bigger problem is with Tenuin, who you might think, oh, he's a powerful lord. He literally breaks the AI of every Lizardman faction and every Skaven faction with that war, that global war that starts. Because the AI just doesn't know how to handle that, pretty much. And that creates a lot of issues in the context of the game. So yeah, Tenuin can work, but let's just say I believe there's legitimate reasons why he got voted down in the Legendary Lord polls by quite a lot of people. Like Oxyatl, yeah, he's better. He does have issues. Mazdamundi is utter rubbish, and so on and so forth. Then we get into Dark Elf territory, and Dark Elves are C tier, worse than Wood Elves, but C tier at 2.2% of the vote, almost. Now, anyone who's watched my channel for any length of time knows that I do believe that the Dark Elves are a really strong race. A lot of people disagree with that, and I have disagreed with that from the start. Basically, a lot of people don't like the slave system and the way it handles. There's also people who played a lot of them in Warhammer 2 and don't like the change to the slave system. That's been the case since day one of Immortal Empires. So that is certainly one perspective. Now, I disagree with that perspective quite firmly, because I think it's an exaggeration. But what do I know, right? This is not a vote poll based on my personal opinion. I'm just explaining where I'm standing. However, there are issues with Dark Elves, legitimate issues. Specifically, a lot of their campaigns are not that great. They have a lot of Legendary Lords, but like outside of, from my point of view, Lokir and Morathi, the campaigns are not great. more people like Malekith than they like Morathi, according to the polls that I've done, and which is a bit surprising. But I guess it's like he's the star campaign of the race, so that's why a lot of people voted him. Though do note, many of the people that do vote on polls on my channel, they're not like new players or newbie players. They're experienced players. Like currently, the poll on campaign difficulty is showing that the vast majority of people play on either very hard or legendary even, with the largest share of the vote being on very hard. So that gives you a clue on this subject, on this particular subject. So we're not talking people who don't know what they're doing. But I think like, yeah, a lot of the Dark Elf campaigns can certainly feel bland. Rakarth is bad. Malice isn't that interesting. Helbron is better than many people give her credit for, but I do understand why people voted it down. Moving on, Tomb Kings in F tier as well. Not as bad as the Lizardmen, but still in F tier. Their campaign design just doesn't work. Like, Khalida and Katep have miserable campaigns. Katep especially. A lot of people voted for Cetra. I think the only good campaign for the Tomb Kings is Arkan, though plenty of people like Cetra. I get why, right? Faction leaders do tend to do well in polling, but not all of them, keep in mind. Like, even for really good races. Problem with Tomb Kings is like the limited army capacity from the start of your campaign for 15 turns. This wasn't an issue in Warhammer 2, especially because you have free army recruitment, but it is an issue in Warhammer 3. They do work in the long term, but the issue is like, if you have a race whose design is built on the idea they have a miserable early game, but then they steamroll after that, that is not a good campaign experience. I'm going to say it. And I also have to mention this particular point for anyone that might be surprised by this. There were a lot of polls that I did in the past, like a year ago, almost 2 years ago. And what was fairly consistent across many polls, many comments, etc., is a lot of people didn't like Tomb Kings. I can also say that any Tomb King video that I did on this channel generally did far worse than many other races. They are not a popular race. That's simply the case. Then we get into the discussion of the Vampire Coast. Oh boy. Vampire Coast is F tier minus. They're nowhere near Daniel tier, but yeah, one of the most awful races. Bad campaign design, not necessarily great legendary lore design, but really they're a race that was released early on in Warhammer 2. And even then, their ideas were not necessarily the best. They were copying things from other races, inventing some new things. Pirate Coves, for instance. Horde armies, or the hybrid Horde army, settlement faction, etc. But the thing is, those systems have not been updated. There's a lot of very outdated stuff with the Vampire Coast. Research tree, campaign pacing, its economy, etc., etc. It kind of worked out in Warhammer 2, but in Warhammer 3, where the campaign meta shifted, they just don't work very well. They're just generally left behind. They were left behind even in Warhammer 2, I would say. Like, they got their release, and then how much have they gotten since then? I mean, it's not as much of a lack of content as Vampire Counts have been waiting for so many years for content, but the thing is, Vampire Counts at least work as a race in the game right now. Coast isn't really a bad spot. I would also like to mention this, that every time I brought this up over the last 2 years, there were plenty of people, you just don't know how to play them. Guys, I spent thousands of hours playing on Legendary. I know how to play the game. I do this for a living. You might figure out that I have a fucking clue. It's not the question of knowing how to play them. You can beat the campaign as freaking Daniel. It does not mean shit. And that's what this poll really is reflecting, from my point of view. That all the stuff that I've heard for so long was ultimately a big pile of rubbish. Next up, moving to Cafe. Now, Cafe just barely gets in B tier. Why do I say that? Well, they got 3.53% of the vote. So they are closer to B tier than they are to C tier, but by like 0.04%. That's how close it was. Cafe actually got worse in the polling. Like, initially they were firmly in B, but now they've been sliding towards C. They're not quite there yet, but they might do so. Cafe is a fairly functional race. They have a good unit roster. They have good Legendary Lords, powerful ones at least. But their campaign just feels so really fucking boring because of climate issues, casualty replenishment issues, and just a lot of design decisions. Harmony is dull, always has been. That's the reality. Cafe was better than Empire. Now it's like the Empire is so far ahead that's not even funny compared to them. So I guess that's something that does play a role. They are certainly the best race that came out with Warhammer 3 by a landslide. Although you can play Be'lakor for free in Immortal Empires, so consider that. But out of the initial races, they are by far the best. If you only own Warhammer 3, certainly Be'lakor is the better campaign than any of the Cafe ones. But outside of that, Cafe is vastly superior. But they still, it's not an issue of being bad, it's an issue of just being dull, ultimately. The lack of Legendary Lord variety. And even Jan Bo, who's pretty great and has a lot of power, he's got a campaign centered on Lustria, which fucking sucks. Then we move on to Kislev. Okay. So, with respect to Kislev, they're in F tier. Though they're only 0.12% of the vote away from being in D. Or 0.53, basically. So they're close, but basically they're at minus 1.12%. What are the issues of Kislev? Oof, don't get me started. Invocation issues, devotion issues, economic build issues, victory conditions, Astankia, and Katrin Kastalt. And Boris Ursus is worth playing, though apparently a lot of the people that do like Kislev like Katrin, or people voted for Katrin. I suppose it's a lot of people don't quite understand what Boris Ursus can do. I've played this campaign in Chaos Ways, going back to Kislev, staying in Chaos Ways. Guys, it's really powerful, but I guess people get frustrated by that. But a really powerful campaign there. But honestly, the issues of Kislev are just so many limitations. If you have a race whose economy just doesn't work and is reliant on looting and sacking settlements, okay, the economy can work if you invest a lot of money to build it. There is a way to reduce construction costs, there is a cheese, but honestly, that just says to me, someone pointed out, you can get a bunch of Ice Witch Lords and basically get free buildings. I'm like, what? Granted, I haven't trained Ice Witch Lords in a year because I have the load save character system and a bunch of them saved with good traits, so why would I bother? But, if you're having to cheese to have a decent campaign, and that certainly is a cheese, that's a very broken fucking race. And that's the case with Kislev. The level of broken, it's taken almost 2 years or a year and a half to realize just how utterly broken Kislev is, and they are. They've been since day one. SOC changed nothing about their campaign systems. Absolutely nothing. Now look, maybe something will happen with 5.1. That should happen, CA. Don't give me that crap that racial reworks are hard to do. Modders have been able to implement things. No, people with zero modding experience have been able to fix it. The fact that we have the same devotion, same victory conditions, same economy, same issues for almost 2 years, for over 2 years since Realms of Chaos is pretty damn horrible. They need an update. They desperately need it. They're probably not going to get it, or they might not get any DLC, but they absolutely need a racial update. Maybe do that for free, CA, because this is really fucking pathetic. Corn. Ooh, this is going to be juicy. I know what you're thinking about this. Costin hates corn, so of course corn is going to be low on this list. Well, I actually, in the last race poll that I did, I actually rated him higher than what you guys did. He's an F tier. He's better than Tomb Kings and Lizardmen, but he's still an F tier. For a while, it looked like he might go towards F tier minus, but it kind of stabilized. What do I have to say about Corn? Oh, man. Corn as a race, not Scarbrand. And now, of course, we have that association, but if you take away Scarbrand from Corn, it's a nothing faction. It doesn't work. You get the Blood Host, that's about it, but the economy isn't there, the systems aren't there. It's an economy built on one lord. That's why, by the way, Corn needs an update. Because unless you add a new legendary lord that works exactly like Scarbrand or some variation of it, It's not gonna fucking work in a campaign, gentlemen. Yeah, people are saying Khorne is fine. It is not fine. You want to believe? You don't believe me? Get Mixu's Unlocker and play a minor faction of Khorne in your campaign, and compare that, by the way, to playing a minor faction of Dwarves. Try playing a campaign as a minor faction of Khorne and see how that goes for you once you strip away Scarbrand's Lord effects and his faction effects. You will realize how fucking bad this race actually is. So yeah, Scarbrand is a powerful lord. I don't deny that. He's a powerful lord for a shitty fucking race. That's simply a fact. For a really, really, really bad race. And on this subject, yes, I do feel completely vindicated on this entire subject. How vindicated? Well, let me just play a little audio clip over here.
In a world on the brink of chaos, we were promised a nightmare. Scarbrand, the ultimate destroyer. Instead, we got a bumbling fool, an overhyped clown staggering through his campaign like a blind drunk. Scarbrand, the supposed harbinger of terror, is nothing more than a pathetic joke. His once feared roars now sound like whimpers of a beaten dog. Witness the downfall of a so-called legend, a pitiful failure who couldn't conquer a chicken coop. Scarbrand, the mighty. More like Scarbrand, the miserable laughingstock. The mighty have indeed fallen, and no one is more laughable than this fiery fraud.
Yeah. And this is the one thing a lot of people disagreed with me on. The one thing I said when I did my first race tier list, this was very early on in Immortal Empires. I got some things wrong, I admit, or I had the better opinion of Norsca than I should have, but I didn't realize the monster hunts were broken so early on, because obviously I was playing everything all over the place, so I didn't have time to figure all that out. But Norsca also got nerfed, by the way, by CA. Brilliant decisions. Here's the thing, though. I said demons were all F tier. All of them. Without exception. They all were, actually. And that's what people believe, for the most part. It feels good to be right after all this time. Oh, but you see, you just need to know how to play them. You know what? I'm just gonna do a video today, tomorrow, something like that, on how to play fucking Khorne on Legendary with no mods and show you how the fuck I know how to play Khorne. I do know how to play Khorne, gentlemen. Many people know how to play Khorne. It's still crap. Accept that. Or not. But that's on you. Anyway. Chaos Dwarves. S tier. Though, actually a bit lower than 8%. Initially, they did get over 8% for a while. They were leading the pack over there. But results at the moment indicate that they're just 7.98% or something like that. Basically, great race, nothing to talk about. I think like the only thing I would say, like Zaytan's campaign is not that great. Astrogoth and Razov do work very well. Great campaign systems, really unique systems. I love seeing the Troy economy in the system. I think like their early game could be a bit more versatile because it's just like boring to recruit hobgoblins and then until you get armament production on. So I would like to see that, maybe more gold, all that. In their early game, more variety, or maybe just base more unit caps early on in a campaign. Like instead of like 1-2 units, let's have 4. Just an idea. For basic units, more advanced units like 2. That would make things more interesting from my point of view. Okay, Slaanesh. Oof. When I said that people hate demons, I wasn't fucking lying, gentlemen. Slaanesh is the worst F tier minus faction. It's not quite in Daniel tier of minus 8%, but it's there. It makes sense. Like, as I stated earlier, campaigns that have lack of variety with Legendary Lords do worse than the ones that do. Castors do have that, at least with Razov. And look, it's not necessarily just the sheer number of campaigns, it's also like how good those campaigns are. Razov is an amazing campaign. Astrogoth is an amazing campaign. More beneficial in the early game than long term, but still. Even Zaytan, like Zaytan works really well in the late game. That's the kind of thing, like Astrogoth early game, Zaytan late game. Razov kind of mixed somewhere, like good early game and good late game. Maybe not quite as crazy as Zaytan for several reasons, but still. Slaanesh, only one campaign, it's not a great one. Like, it's fun to play once to conquer Ulthuan, especially on like Legendary very hard, which I did. Was certainly an experience. But you do that once or twice, and that's it. That is Sinnelleos' campaign. And you don't want to play a long campaign because you just vassalize all of Ulthuan, which you're incentivized to do because when you subjugate the faction, you get those cultists, you get the resource. And the vassal system just trivializes the game. The problem is it's also trivializing the game in a bad way because you have horrible replenishment, and so you end up fighting a bunch of battles that even if you lose everything, it won't matter because Tyrion, Alarion, and Lothlorien will just clean up everything in their path. So it ends up being meaningless. That's not a great campaign system. It's dull as shit. That's all I'm going to say on Sinnelleos. They definitely need a rework. Moving on to Nurgle. D tier. I'm just looking at the actual numbers of percentage. Like, basically, they're better than Beastmen. And not quite as good as Vampire Counts in the poll. Basically, Nurgle got an update. They went from being one of genuinely the worst factions that probably would have been voted Daniel tier on this poll to they rose up 3 tier positions, basically. And that is an improvement, but there's still issues. Infection issues, climate issues, slow building times, all that. Still problems. Maybe that gets improved to 5.0 on, maybe it doesn't. Like, basically with Nurgle, the best Nurgle campaign is Festus, by far. Tamarkand is a really fun lord, don't get me wrong on that, but this is not about the individual campaigns. Like, again, having one good campaign for a race does not necessarily justify it. Obviously, it's better than, Slaanesh, but it's still pretty bad. Tzeentch, F tier minus. You know how a lot of people said, oh, Kairos is a good lord, and you just don't know how to play him. Like, all those comments. Guys, there's a lot of people to play this game. The average player time, by the way, in a poll I had done like over a year ago or something like that, was like over 300 hours. And the average difficulty right now is very hard legendary that I'm getting on people. So yeah, people do know how to play this game. It just, Tzeentch sucks. The Changeling is genuinely one of the worst campaigns in the entire fucking game. And Kairos, I'm not even going to talk about it. You know, I refuse to talk about it. Everything that's in FTR minus, like Bretonnia is the only thing that I'm willing to entertain because, look, Bretonnia has issues with battles, but in terms of the campaign systems, yeah, vows are shit. Yes, that's a horrible thing. They do have research issues, but I would certainly put Bretonnia in a C tier, or B, even. But Tzeentch has very few redeemable qualities. The armies are powerful, but they're not fun. The economy is crap. The systems are crap. The whole changing of ways is a meaningless, crappy mechanic. So yeah. Then we have ogres. What do you want me to say? I think Norska, like, I didn't even look at the ogre and the Norska problems. It's just, like, I know where they are. But yeah, actually looking at them right now, it's like, yeah, Norska is worse than ogres. What do I want to say? Another campaign that doesn't work very well within the entire meta of the game. There is nothing more that I need to say on this entire damn subject. Ogres are horrible. Their camp system is broken. Their research tree is broken. Their lords are bad. Greasus' animation issues still plague the game to this day. So on and so on and so forth. Their roster is limited and don't even use it in most campaigns. The way they actually fight in battle is questionable. Like, when I say that, it's like you play ogres and you get things like Iron Guts and you see them struggling to kill fricking goblin archers. Now, granted, Grimgore goblin archers, but still goblin fucking archers. You know that, Khorne has an ability that you can summon bloodletters on units on a battlefield. Basically, Iron Guts should be capable of fighting bloodletters. You know what would happen if you summon a bloodletter unit in the middle of a fucking goblin archer stack? They would slaughter it. Well, maybe not all of it. They do have limited duration and all that, but they would probably kill a lot of them. You throw in an Iron Gut, a single unit of Iron Gut against a single unit of goblin archers, they will take forever to kill them. Ogre Bulls, same problem. Gorgers do well, sure, but yeah, just like there's some weird animation situation. I think the problem with ogres, they're not monsters, so they don't have the same kind of benefits like trolls do. But they're not regular infantry either, so they're kind of in between, so they end up not working because of that. It's weird. Like, some of their units do, don't get me wrong, but a lot of them don't. And that's not even talking the monumental issues of campaign systems. And then, of course, we have Daniel. I'll be blunt, I don't even give a damn to put him on this list. Like, there. That's your tier list. I didn't want to put him on the list because then I have to rebuild this entire list. Yeah, that's not fun. I basically have to click this button and then, yeah, do all of this again. So there's your tier list for the races of Warhammer 3 according to your votes, ladies and gentlemen. That would be all. I've said what I had to say. You guys voted on it. You can take issue with the polling methodology and all that kind of stuff. With regards to polling methodology, yes, it's imperfect. It's the best I can get for something that is easy to do. So I obviously want as many people to vote on it. If I made them more complex, it would put people off, obviously. The question, though, does this kind of data match prevailing sentiment? Well, based on things I've heard since Immortal Empires came out, and that I hear to this day, comments, people in various polls that I've done for almost 2 years, so on and so forth, yeah, it does match it, for the most part. There are some things I could say I'm a bit surprised by, maybe, like, potentially, though I'm not surprised. Like, High Elves could be higher tier. Sure, I would have expected that. Possibly. Dark Elves being lower, not surprising. Vampire counts being lower, not at all surprising. Khorne being lower, Khorne being this low, according to community votes. Well, I guess it just goes to show that just because you have a couple of hundred fucking people yelling on Reddit on this subject, and not even a couple of hundred, I'm being generous here. No, a couple dozen people. Yeah, a couple dozen people, I'm sorry to say that doesn't mean shit, basically. Like, that's the thing with forums and discussion boards in general. You have, like, even on very large forums and discussion boards, you end up having, on a particular subject, even if it's, like, extremely popular, you end up having discussions dominated by a handful of users. That's exactly what happens with Khorne. You say anything about Khorne bad, and it's like you get those people over and over again. That's the kind of thing that does happen. I say that as someone who is very active on many controversial topics on various forums. And this is apparent, I do notice. And that's the same with how people discuss Khorne or Skaven or anything like that. You get people who are really dedicated on one way or another discussing it, and that's what happens. So you can try and dismiss this polling data, but all I'm gonna say is, if you have anything to suggest, any kind of poll that would suggest otherwise, go ahead, post it. Feel free to prove me wrong. If not for the recent events, honestly, if not for what had happened recently with Legend, what I was intending to do, actually, once he had settled down, because his wife gave birth, so obviously asking him at this time would be a bad thing. But once that had settled down, I had intended to ask him to link these polls on his channel. Now, that's no longer a plan, for obvious reasons, right? Kostin signing out.